You know, beer's a massive thing.
You could open a brewery, Trois Dames.
Yeah. Hoppy sour beers with spices, dark sour beers, blended sour beers, and the list goes on and on and on.
Das ist Jordan aus den USA. Er ist Brauer hier und eigentlich spezialisiert auf die sauren Biere. What's the special thing about the sour beers here?
Well, the sour beers here, they're all made with our house culture that includes wild yeast and bacteria. This is Brettanomyces, lab-cultured wild yeast, some of which comes from our favorite breweries, and even some comes from lambic breweries in Belgium. We're also using lactobacillus, which is the same kind of a bacteria that's made to use yogurt, and this has a souring effect in our beer. And these beers are often barrel-aged, as you can see behind me here.
Wanderweg.
Yes, and the wood helps to bring in oxygen into the beer very slowly, and this helps to support these long and complex fermentations that are characteristic of these kinds of sour beers made with wild yeast and souring bacteria.
Okay. When did you come to Sainte Croix?
Yeah, I've been brewing with Brasserie Trois Dames for about 2.5 years now. I came here specifically to make sour beers. I had previously been making this kind of beer in the United States. The first brewery I worked for was called Jester King, and they're quite well known for making similar sorts of beers. We're also doing some spontaneously fermented beers here. So these are beers where we're not adding yeast or bacteria. Yeast and bacteria from the air around us actually ferments the beer. The Vieille Cave is where those beers are stored, but we do some primary fermentation for that beer here in this room as well.
So you are the specialist for sour beers?
Exactly, yes.
How is it to work here in Sainte Croix, such a small village?
Yes, it's a small village.
Where they speak French.
Yeah, they do speak French here. That's very different from Texas, where I'm from. They don't speak a lot of French there. But there's a lot of yeast in the area because of the farming and the ranching, the cows that are around here as well. And this is a really good thing, actually. It means that the microflora that's in the air all around us is healthy. And this is really good for making spontaneously fermented beers, which we do some of here. But also, it's just a nice place to work outside of the city, where you can take a breath of fresh air, and you can leave the problems of the city behind and focus on the problems of the brewery and of work, and one issue at a time there.
Would it be possible to make spontaneous fermentation, let's say, in a big city?
I think that it's actually absolutely possible. Tradition for spontaneous fermentation comes from Belgium.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of breweries in the Brussels area that are still doing a lot of spontaneous fermentation. Mm-hmm. And this isn't a place that's, an agricultural sort of space. This is a city. So I could absolutely say that those types of fermentations are possible in big cities. I think that what we have here is unique. And I think that maybe it's better to be in a place where there's agriculture. You're going to find different elements in the air, and those agents of fermentation are going to help us to make better beer. But I think that it's absolutely possible to make it in big cities. It's just going to be a different flavor that comes out, and I happen to like what we have. A different
taste and flavor.
Yes.
If you would ferment your beer in Lausanne or
absolutely,
and not here.
Yes, and we've done a collaboration actually with Nebuleuse from Lausanne, where they made the wort, the unfermented beer at their brewery in Lausanne, and filled up these stainless tanks behind you here. We loaded them on a trailer. And yeah, they're upside down at the moment, but we loaded them on a trailer, and we filled them up with about 350 liters of wort in each one of these, and we drove it to an orchard where they grow kiwis, and we collected yeast and bacteria from the air in the orchard. And we had a little apéro and we had a really nice time. And then we drove to a winery. And we did the same thing. And we even pumped some of this unfermented beer into a tank where they had been making wine, and got some of the yeast and bacteria from that winemaker and from the area around his cellar, and the beautiful air around there. And then we came back to the brewery here and we put it in a big oak tank in a foeder, and we did primary fermentation. And the flavors that have come out of that beer are quite different than the flavors that have come out of the beers that we've done spontaneous fermentation just here at the brewery. For us, this is evidence that the yeast and bacteria that are native to a specific place, they have an effect, a profound effect on these kinds of beers.
Yeah. Do the Swiss beer drinkers like this kind of beers? Because 90% they prefer the lager style.
Right, absolutely. I think
when you came here to Switzerland, what was your impression of the Swiss beer drinkers?
Well, I didn't really know, but I knew that Swiss beer drinkers were going to have some kind of a taste, and there were going to be some people that had an idea of what these beers were all about. But what I found is that this is a really a growing part of the craft beer drinking segment, and more people are curious about sour beers and are trying them. And I think it's really important that we educate people about these beers so that they understand what they're drinking. And more people are catching on and are really loving these kinds of sour beers. That we hope to explore with people. Yeah. And they're not just kettle soured or spontaneously fermented beers. There's hoppy sour beers, and there's sour beers with spices, and there's dark sour beers, and there's sour beers that have a lot of alcohol, and sour beers that have just a little bit of alcohol, and blended sour beers, and the list goes on and on and on. But it's a huge category of beers. Just like IPA is a big category. There's so many different kinds of IPA out there, so many different kinds of stout out there, and sour beer is another kind of massive category that for those that enjoy sour beer should be explored, and we hope that we can lead people through that exploration.
I think you are a real beer enthusiast. What is beer for you?
Beer? Well, beer, gosh, it's more than the sum of its parts. When you talk about beer, you have to remember that beer is also something that's very humble. It's mostly water, but for me, it's a huge part of my life. It's not only my profession, but it's things. It consumes my time, my free time as well. I read books about beer. It is a big community for me that's international. You know, I have friends all over the world that are beer makers, work in the beer industry, or just passionate consumers. There's always new beers that are coming out, new beer trends, new production techniques, and new elements to beer that fascinate me.
Do you have plans for the next years? Okay, you work here now.
Yeah.
But perhaps, I don't know, an own brewery some days?
Someday, yeah.
Perhaps, or
perhaps, absolutely. But, right now I'm concentrated on Trois Dames, and that life here for everyone, Trois Dames, gets easier, and we try to have a good time.
I think you have a good time here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You could open a brewery, Trois Dames.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's already too many guys in the beer industry.
Yeah.
It's better to dedicate beer to all the hardworking women out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Absolutely.
For this information.
Yeah. My pleasure.
And I wish you will have a lot of great brews.
Yeah. We'll have a lot of good brews coming up, definitely. Beer's not going to solve all of the problems of our world.
This would be great.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. But if it can serve to distract us for a moment or two from the big problems of our day, and if it can bring us joy and happiness into our lives, if it can bring our friends together and our communities together, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. And bringing people together, that's what solves the problems of our world. And so beer, in a way, can be part of the solution. You know, beer's a massive thing, and that community of beer is really important to me.
Yeah.